I've dealt with every flavor of arrogance in my courtroom, but the morning that police chief strutted in like he owned the oxygen in the room, I knew I was in for a special kind of stupidity. You know, the premium grade, the kind that sparkles because it thinks it's untouchable. He didn't walk. He hovered chin up, chest out, like he believed gravity was optional for people with shiny badges. I watched him take his seat at the defendant's table, and I swear he smirked at me. At me! That's like smirking at a hurricane and expecting to stay dry. I tapped my pen once, and the entire courtroom went silent except for him because, of course, he had something to say. "Let's expedite this, Your Honor," he announced, crossing his arms like he was posing for a recruitment poster. "I'm a busy man, and frankly, the law doesn't really apply to me in the same way it does to regular citizens." I blinked, slowly. Because sometimes when someone says something so breathtakingly idiotic, your brain needs a moment to reboot. "Is that so?" I asked, leaning forward. "That must be very convenient. Tell me, did the legislature specifically carve out a chief exception while I was on vacation, or is this delusion homegrown?" He shifted just an inch, but I saw it, the first crack in the armor. That's my specialty, spotting the tiny fractures before the big collapse. He opened his mouth ready with another self-incriminating gem, but I held up a finger. "No, don't speak yet. Every sentence you say seems to make you sound dumber, and I'm trying to preserve what little respect I have left for your badge." His attorney looked like he wanted to slide under the table, disappear, or perhaps change careers entirely. I didn't blame him. Representing a man who declares himself allergic to the law has to feel like showing up to a chess match with a client who insists the pawns can fly. I turned to the file in front of me. Thick, very thick. Pages full of complaints, incident reports, citizen statements, and a handful of videos that made my eyebrows climb higher each time I watched them. Abuse of power wasn't even the right phrase. This was abuse power optional. He had acted like the world was a vending machine, and his badge was the currency. "I see allegations of bribery," I said, not looking up. "Intimidation of witnesses, misuse of departmental funds, destruction of evidence. Oh, and my personal favorite, ordering subordinates to tase a man for talking back. Charming leadership style. Very forward-thinking. Straight out of the medieval handbook." He lifted his chin. "Those charges won't stick. They never do." "I'm sure they don't," I replied. "Not when you're the one holding the glue." His jaw tightened. "Good. I like when the facade slips. It tells me I'm getting close to the center of the rot. Arrogant people always think they're marble, but pride, when tapped correctly, shatters like cheap ceramic." "Chief," I said, folding my hands, "tell me something. When did you decide accountability was beneath you? Was it before or after? You threatened that city clerk for denying your reimbursement request for a steakhouse dinner that cost more than my first car." He shrugged, as if ethics were menu items you could choose from. "Perks of leadership," he said. "No, sir. Leadership is responsibility. What you're describing is freeloading with a side of delusion." He rolled his eyes. "And let me tell you, I've seen teenagers do that at their parents, but doing it at a judge, that's recreational stupidity." I took a breath because I like to give people one last chance to save themselves from the cliff they're marching off, but he didn't want saving. He wanted the cliff built bigger, higher, and with a spotlight shining on him as he made the leap. "Your Honor," he said in a tone that could curdle milk, "I've run this city for 15 years. People respect me. They fear me. They know not to cross me." "Fascinating," I said. "You just described a mob boss, not a public servant. Would you like to amend that statement before I embroider it on a pillow for the jury?" His lawyer finally tried to intervene. "Your Honor, my client is simply frustrated. No, I cut in. Frustration is when you can't find parking. This is narcissism sprinkled with entitlement and baked in corruption." The chief leaned back in his chair, smirking again. "Look, Judge, we can do this dance all day, but at the end of it, you and I both know nothing is going to happen to me. It never does." That was the moment. The exact second his arrogance crystallized into something useful evidence. Because when someone tells you who they are boldly, confidently, stupidly, you write it down and thank them for the free gift? "Is that a confession?" I asked lightly. He scoffed. "It's reality." "Oh, good," I said. "Then let's dose you with some of mine." In my courtroom, the law absolutely applies to you. In fact, it applies to you with particular enthusiasm. The gallery behind him murmured, sensing the shift in the air. I love that moment, the collective realization that the person who thought he was untouchable is about to find out gravity works just fine. He tried to smile through it, but now his eyes flicked around, calculating. Arrogant men always resort to math when their ego gets threatened. They start tallying imaginary leverage, imaginary allies, imaginary escape hatches. Your Honor, he said slowly, I don't think you understand how this city works. Oh, Chief, I replied, I understand exactly how it works. What you're unclear on is how I work. I leaned forward again, close enough that he could see I wasn't bluffing. I don't bluff. Bluffing is for poker tables and insecure people. I deal only in certainty. You abused your badge, I said. You terrorized citizens you were sworn to protect. You treated the law like a doormat. And now you want to stand here and declare yourself immune. I paused, letting the silence tighten around him. Well, I have news. When someone tells me they think the rules don't apply to them, I make it my personal mission to apply them with maximum force. His smirk vanished. And that finally was the first honest thing he'd shown me all morning. I've seen fear in a lot of forms, sweaty palms, twitching jaws, frantic blinking, but the Chief's version was different. It was quiet, controlled, the kind of fear a man feels when he realizes the world isn't bending the way he expected it to, and for the first time he can't force it to kneel. That kind of fear arrives like a cold draft under a locked door, subtle but impossible to ignore. His lawyer cleared his throat, the kind of nervous little cough attorneys make when they know their client is actively lighting himself on fire. Your Honor, perhaps we could... Counselor, I said without looking at him, unless you're about to produce a time machine or an ethics transplant, I suggest you sit still. The courtroom chuckled, soft but unanimous. If the Chief had any sense, he'd have let that be his cue to stop digging. But arrogance has a shovel for a heartbeat, and his was still thumping. He leaned forward, planting his elbows on the table like this was a negotiation. Judge Judy, he said, trying to soften his tone into something resembling charm, let's be reasonable. You know how politics works. You know how pressure works. I've had to make tough calls to keep this city running. Sometimes rules need flexibility. I stared at him for a full 3 seconds. If you say greater good, I'm holding you in contempt just for being predictable. He hesitated, lips parting. He was absolutely about to say it. I watched him rethink the words mid-breath. That was almost impressive. Not enough to help him, but enough to amuse me. Instead, he said, I protect this city. Everyone knows that. And yet I said, flipping a page in the file, I see no evidence of any protection. What I do see is a collection of behavior that would make a crook blush. Let's discuss the traffic stop incident. You remember the one, the teenage boy you handcuffed for reckless eyeballing? He shifted. He was being disrespectful. Disrespectful is not a crime, I said. If it were half, this courtroom would be in orange jumpsuits by now, including you. He opened his mouth again, but I cut him off. And before you say one more word to justify it, don't. The video shows everything. You approached that boy like he owed you money, and you escalated the situation faster than a bull seeing red. His jaw worked side to side, a nervous tic or irritation. Usually the same thing in men like him. I continued, tell me, Chief, do you always treat citizens as if they're obstacles, or is that a special privilege you reserve for children? His attorney finally interjected, Your Honor, these questions, I said, are the exact reason we're here. Your client acted like a schoolyard bully with government funding. The gallery murmured again. I ignored it. My eyes stayed on the Chief. People like him need steady pressure, like cracking a stone to reveal what's festering inside. He sat up straighter. You know, Judge, I think you're enjoying this. Oh, I am, I said without hesitation. There's nothing more satisfying than watching a man who built his throne on intimidation realize the chair has termites. He bristled. I've kept order in this city for a decade. No, I corrected. You've kept fear. Fear isn't order. It's laziness dressed up as authority. He glared at me, a real full-bodied glare. I didn't blink. I could outglare a statue if I wanted to. Let's move on, I said. We have a full buffet of misconduct to get through, and I intend to sample every dish. His lawyer inhaled sharply, like someone preparing for turbulence. Misappropriation of funds, I read aloud. Department-issued credit card used for purchases totaling, let's see, $5,000 at a luxury clothing store. You want to explain that? He shrugged, again with the shrugging. If indifference were an Olympic sport, he'd be dripping in gold medals. Public image matters, he said. As chief, I need to look the part. I tilted my head. So the taxpayers bought your designer suits. They benefited from it, he argued. People respect authority that presents itself well. People respect integrity, I snapped. Clothes are just fabric. Integrity is what keeps the badge from turning into a toy. His lips tightened. Good. That meant the words landed where they needed to. I continued. And then we have the small matter of the evidence locker incident. Missing narcotics. Signed out under your name. No record of return. He spread his hands as though I were the one being unreasonable. Confidential operation. Can't disclose. You can disclose, I said. If the operation existed, which it didn't, how would you know? He challenged. I raised an eyebrow. Because I called the task force commander. He laughed so hard he dropped the phone. His attorney pinched the bridge of his nose, silently calculating how many showers he'd need to wash this case off his career. The chief huffed. Judge, you're blowing all of this out of proportion. Oh, really? So the citizens complaining about threats, the officers complaining about coercion, the videos, the financial records, the missing evidence, the intimidation, those are what minor inconveniences. He smirked again. This city needs strong leadership. Leadership, I said slowly, is not the ability to scare people into silence. Leadership is the willingness to be held accountable. And you've avoided accountability like it's pollen and you're allergic. He leaned back. Look, I've survived bigger inquiries than this. I nodded. Yes. And I'm sure you believed you'd survive this one too until you opened your mouth and handed me your entire ego on a silver platter. His face reddened. I savored it. Let me paint a picture for you, I said. You think you're untouchable. You think your badge is a shield. You think status is immunity. But here's the thing about power. When misused, it doesn't protect you. It exposes you. He exhaled through his nose a slow, angry puff. Are you done lecturing? Not even close, I said. I'm just warming up. He clenched his fists, a lovely sign of unraveling. You believe the law doesn't apply to you, I said. That is the most dangerous belief a public official can hold. And the most pathetic, he repeated. Yes, pathetic. Because only a weak man needs immunity to feel strong. He didn't answer, which was wise. Silence was the first competent decision he'd made all morning. I closed the file gently, a gesture that always gets attention. People fear the slam. They should fear the quiet close. Chief, I said, you've mistaken fear for respect and corruption for competence. And you've done it for so long you've convinced yourself it's normal. But today is the day you find out the truth. He swallowed. There it was, the pulse of dread. In my courtroom, I said, you are not a chief. You are not a symbol. You are not a man above the law. You are simply another defendant. And the law is about to reacquaint itself with you. The chief's stare hardened into something between resentment and disbelief, like he was finally grasping the severity of the situation, but still holding on to the fantasy that he could bully his way out of it. Men like him always go through the stages: denial, arrogance, posturing, and then the slow, reluctant crawl toward reality. He was still stuck somewhere between stages 2 and 3, kicking and screaming the whole way. I leaned back in my chair and let the silence stretch. Silence is a tool. Use it well, and it speaks louder than half the lawyers who wander into my courtroom. Eventually, the chief shifted uncomfortably. Good. That meant he felt the weight of it, the shift of power, the change in temperature, the undeniable truth that he was no longer the predator in the room. Let's address the witness intimidation claims, I said, breaking the quiet. Specifically, the one involving Miss Carter, the woman who filed a harassment complaint against one of your officers. He rolled his eyes. She exaggerated. People like her always exaggerate. I raised an eyebrow. People like her. He hesitated, realizing he'd wandered into dangerous territory. I mean, civilians who misunderstand protocol. Oh, I see, I said. So the recorded phone call where you told her to remember who keeps this city safe, was that protocol, or was that just your inner tyrant clearing its throat? The chief opened his mouth, but nothing came out. A good sign. His arrogance was finally meeting resistance from his common sense, or what was left of it. I continued. She said she felt threatened. Frankly, I felt threatened for her when I heard that recording. You sounded like a loan shark giving someone one last chance before breaking kneecaps. Somebody in the gallery snorted? I didn't bother identifying who. It wasn't wrong. He stiffened. I was trying to avoid unnecessary conflict. I leaned forward. Intimidation is conflict. You don't get credit for setting a fire and then claiming you prevented the forest from burning by only torching one tree. His attorney whispered something frantically to him, probably some version of "stop talking," which was sound advice, though tragically late. But the chief didn't take it. Of course he didn't. He sat up straighter and said, "Judge, you don't understand what it's like running a department. You don't know the pressure, the politics, I held up a hand. Chief, I could stack every excuse you just listed on top of each other and they still wouldn't reach the height of your ego." I tapped the file again. Let's shift gears. The officer rotation assignments. Several officers reported that you reassigned them to worse shifts after they refused to falsify reports. Care to explain? He scoffed. They were incompetent. Incompetent, I repeated. Interesting definition you have. According to their evaluations signed by you, by the way, they were among your top performers. He blinked. Twice. Those evaluations were optimistic. I stared at him. So when they were useful to you, they were excellent officers. But the moment they refused to play along with your corruption, they magically became incompetent. I let that sink in. Your logic is performing acrobatics, Chief, and not very well. He opened his mouth to respond, but his lawyer finally found his spine. Your Honor, the attorney said, my client maintains that his decisions were within administrative discretion. Discretion, I repeated, turning my gaze on him for the first time. Counselor, let me educate you. Discretion is choosing between paper clips and staples. Discretion is deciding whether to hold a meeting at 10 or 11. Discretion is not punishing officers for having ethics. The lawyer deflated like someone had poked a hole in his will to live. I returned my attention to the chief. There's a theme here, I said. Do you see it? Because I do. Every time someone didn't bend to your will, you retaliated. Every time someone acted with honesty, you treated it like betrayal. Every time someone stood upright, you tried to knock them down so you'd look taller. That's not true, he snapped. I've done nothing but serve this community. Really, I asked. Because the community disagrees. I reached for another file, the citizen petition. Over 2,000 signatures. That number wasn't just a statistic, it was a verdict formed long before this trial even began. This petition, I said, holding it up, was signed by people who feel less safe with you in charge. People who believe you abuse your authority. People who think your department became a personal fiefdom instead of a public office. He clenched his jaw. People don't know what they want. No, I said, they know exactly what they want. They want justice. They want honesty. They want a police chief who doesn't behave like a dictator, trying to pass himself off as a civil servant. His nostrils flared. I've given my life to this job. I nodded. And in return, you expected immunity from accountability. A poor bargain. I leaned forward again. Let me tell you something that should have been obvious from the start. Power isn't a shield. It's a responsibility. You wore that badge like armor when it was meant to be a promise. He swallowed hard. You're twisting everything. No, Chief, I said. I'm untangling it. You did the twisting. He looked away, staring somewhere past the gallery, as if searching for a rescue that would never come. That's the moment I always watch, for the moment the defendant starts bargaining silently with the universe. But the universe isn't in my courtroom. I am. I flipped to the last section of the file. Let's talk about the whistleblower. His head snapped toward me. What whistleblower? That's adorable, I said. You think I'm going to tell you? I slid the file aside. Whoever it is, they documented everything. Dates, orders, threats, recordings, a complete archive of your behavior. A ripple ran through the room. Even the chief's lawyer looked surprised. For months, I said, someone in your department watched you act like the law was your personal chew toy, and they decided enough was enough. The chief's voice dropped an octave. I want a name. And I want a vacation home in Santorini, I said. But neither of us is getting what we want today. He glared again, but this time the glare wasn't just anger. It was fear and fury at being afraid. I steepled my fingers. Chief, you spent years telling people the rules didn't apply to you. You enforced fear instead of justice. You weaponized authority, and now you want mercy. He didn't respond. Good, I said, because you're not getting any. For a moment, the chief just sat there, still rigid, as if he'd finally slammed into the brick wall. Reality had been patiently holding up for him all morning. His eyes darted across the courtroom, not in confidence anymore, but calculation. That's always the last gasp of a man losing control. He starts scanning the room like one of the walls might sprout a secret exit. There wasn't one. Not for him. Let's proceed, I said, because he looked like he needed the reminder that time does in fact keep moving, even when his ego wishes it wouldn't. I reached for another document, the internal audit report. This one reads like a crime novel, except the writing is worse and the villain is sitting 10 feet from me. He exhaled sharply. This is ridiculous. No, I said, this is accountability. Something you should have met a long, long time ago. I skimmed the lines, letting them slice the air between us. Unauthorized overtime payouts to officers who didn't work a single additional hour. Grant funds misallocated, which is a polite way of saying they vanished into your pet projects. Vehicle maintenance receipts for a car your department doesn't even own. And oh, this is my favorite billing, the city for community outreach dinners that consisted of you eating ribeye steaks alone. He lifted a hand. Those funds were used to maintain community relationships. Which community? I snapped. The community of you, yourself, and your ego, because no one else was invited to those dinners. His attorney tried again. Your Honor, these expenditures weren't criminal. Not criminal. I turned to him with a look I usually reserve for teenagers, trying to argue that chores violate their human rights. Counselor fraudulent spending of public money absolutely qualifies as criminal. If you're unclear on that, I suggest you borrow a law textbook. Or a brain. He pressed his lips together. Good choice. I shifted my gaze back to the chief. Here's the reality. You treated the city budget like your personal allowance. And now you're offended that anyone noticed. He straightened. I've operated this department under enormous strain. If I had to make unconventional choices. Unconventional, I cut in. No, Chief. Unconventional is organizing files alphabetically by color. What you did is steal. Steal with paperwork. He slammed his palm on the table. I did what I had to. The gallery collectively inhaled. His lawyer looked like he might pass out. I leaned forward, voice razor sharp. You keep using that phrase, what I had to. Let me translate it, what I wanted to. Because every choice you made benefited one person, you. He glared at me. You don't understand the sacrifices. I understand them perfectly, I said. You sacrificed integrity. You sacrificed trust. You sacrificed the very foundation of your role. And you did it with the enthusiasm of someone redecorating a living room. He gritted his teeth. People respected me. No, I said. They feared you. And the fact that you can't tell the difference is exactly why you're sitting here. He looked like he wanted to argue, but then he caught something in my expression, maybe the complete absence of patience, and thought better of it. For a moment, I let the silence breathe again. Then I held up the final item in the stack, a flash drive. This, I said, contains the recordings from inside the department, the ones your whistleblower collected, every threat, every order, every charming little moment where you explained to your subordinates that laws don't apply to you. His jaw clenched. Those recordings were stolen. Stolen, I repeated. Chief, when someone documents your misconduct because they're trying to protect the public, that's not theft. That's self-defense. He looked away, eyes narrowing. The first hint of genuine panic flickered beneath his composure. Not much, he was too proud for that, but enough to tell me I'd struck bone. I continued. One recording in particular stood out. Would you like me to play it? His head whipped back toward me. No. Interesting, I said. Because if it were harmless, you would have said yes. I tapped the drive against the bench. In that clip, you told your officers, and I quote, the city wants rules. I want results. And when those don't match, we go with mine. His throat bobbed. And then I continued. You said the phrase that headlines are going to adore, laws don't apply to me. He put his hands flat on the table. That was taken out of context. Oh, please, I said. The only way that sentence works in context is if the context is you confessing to being corrupt. He looked like he wanted to shout again, but I wasn't finished. Not even close. Do you know what your problem is, Chief? I asked. You built an identity around invincibility. You thought a badge was a crown, a department was a kingdom, and citizens were subjects. And when someone questioned you, you didn't correct course. You doubled down. He stared at me unblinking, that brittle kind of stillness where anger and fear are fighting for custody of the face. So let me make something simple, I said, lowering my voice just enough that the room leaned in. You weren't chosen to rule. You were chosen to serve. His fingers curled slowly, knuckles whitening. And you failed, I said, spectacularly. He shot up from his chair. His lawyer instantly grabbed his sleeve, whispering something desperate like a man trying to talk a friend off a ledge. Sit, I ordered. There's a certain tone I save for when someone forgets who's in charge. I used it now. The word didn't break the air, it sliced it. The chief sat. Good. I continued, you claim the laws don't apply to you. Well, Chief, today they do. Today the law has you exactly where it wants you, under oath, under scrutiny, and out of excuses. He said nothing. Because here's the truth, I finished. You didn't walk into my courtroom as a leader. You walked in as a cautionary tale. He swallowed once, hard. And I knew he finally understood this wasn't a hearing anymore. It was a reckoning. If there is a precise instant when a man finally realizes the empire he built was made of wet cardboard, I saw it unfold across the chief's face. His shoulders softened, not in humility, but in the dawning comprehension that the armor he'd been wearing was imaginary. And imaginary things, unfortunately for him, offer zero protection in a courtroom. I folded my hands. We're nearing the end, Chief, I said, and I'd like to give you an opportunity. One, I doubt you've ever offered the people under your command to speak honestly. His eyes flicked up. Hope, no. He didn't know what hope was, but maybe the dim spark of a man searching for a lifeline, even if he had no idea how to grab one. Is there anything I asked you want to say before I issue my decision? He hesitated, and for a moment I almost believed he might do the unthinkable, tell the truth. But then his spine stiffened, his chin rose, and the man returned to his default setting, arrogant, delusional, allergic to accountability. He leaned forward. I'll say this, none of these people know what it takes to run a department. They don't know what I've prevented. They don't know what I've handled. They don't know. I cut him off with a single look. Don't do it, I said. Don't waste the last seconds of dignity you have left. He exhaled sharply through his nose like a bull preparing to charge. Judge, I've kept this city safe. Perfect. No one is perfect. But I got results. You got results, I repeated the same way a tornado gets results. Destruction, fear, and debris. His lawyer murmured, Chief, please. He ignored him. I had to maintain discipline. I had to push people. Some officers don't understand pressure. You mean the pressure of being ordered to break the law, I asked. He glared. I pushed them for the sake of the city. No, I said. You pushed them for the sake of your ego. And when they didn't bend, you broke them. He shook his head. You're twisting everything. You keep saying that, I replied, as if repetition will magically turn it into truth. His jaw tightened. I did what was necessary. And I'm about to do the same. I said, the room froze. You could have heard a conscience drop. I lifted the sentencing documents. The chief's eyes flickered, the micro-expression of a man suddenly remembering that consequences are real and not just something he pretends to hand out to civilians he doesn't like. Chief Raymond Doyle, I began, my tone firm enough to plaster itself onto the walls you stand before this court, accused and proven guilty of abuse of power, intimidation, misappropriation of funds, retaliation against employees, interference with investigations, and willful violation of constitutional rights. His fingers twitched. For years, I continued, you acted as if accountability were optional, as if the law were a buffet and you could pick what suited your appetite. Someone whispered in the gallery, it wasn't disrespect, it was awe. You believed, I said, that your badge exempted you from the rules, but in reality, it magnified your responsibility, and you failed it entirely. He shifted in his seat, but there was nowhere to escape physically or otherwise. So here is what's going to happen, I said. Your employment with the police department is terminated effective immediately. A ripple of relief moved through the room. Even his lawyer closed his eyes briefly, as if he'd been waiting for someone to put this man out of his professional misery. You are barred from holding any law enforcement position in this state, permanently. The chief opened his mouth, but I raised one finger and he shut it again. Smart. Finally, regarding the financial misconduct, I said, you are ordered to repay every misused dollar with penalties. I hope those designer suits were worth it because you'll be paying for them twice. And finally, I paused just long enough to let him feel the weight of the words before they landed. For the criminal acts committed under the guise of authority, you are hereby sentenced to 18 months in state custody with an additional 3 years of supervised release. He froze. No blinking, no breathing, just stunned silence, the kind men experience only when reality punches through delusion with brass knuckles. His attorney whispered, Chief, don't react. A doomed request. Because, of course, the chief reacted. He surged to his feet. You can't do this. I didn't even raise my voice. Sit. He didn't. They never learn. Chief Doyle, I said, calm as a surgeon and just as lethal when I said the law would apply to you today. I wasn't making conversation. I was making a promise. 2 bailiffs moved forward. The chief looked from them to me, disbelief, wrinkling his face like badly ironed linen. This is insanity, he spat. No, I said. This is justice. You've just never seen it applied to you before. The bailiffs reached him. He jerked his arm away. I cleared my throat once loud enough. He froze, met my eyes, and finally understood who held the authority in this room. He lowered his arms. The bailiffs took him by the elbows, not harshly, much more gently than he deserved, if anyone asked me. As they escorted him forward, he looked back at me and hissed, Judge, you're making a mistake. Oh, trust me, I said, if I ever make a mistake, the smell of it will alert me. But this is the cleanest decision I've made all week. A faint, hopeless laugh escaped someone in the gallery. Even the chief heard it. He turned away. When the doors closed behind him, the silence that filled the room wasn't tense anymore. It was relieved, cleansed, like the air had finally been allowed to breathe again. I gathered my papers, stacked them neatly, and said the only closing line that fit, next case. And let me tell you, justice never felt lighter.